Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this conversation with the governor. And it's my absolute delight to have a chance to interview you, since you are not only one of the most hyperactive governors out there today, you also have one of the highest approval ratings across America. I think it's currently about 60% in your state, is that right? But you're also one of the most outspoken, or frankly spoken. And I think that's partly because you are the only state in America which has a single term. So you have nothing to lose, effectively. Right. So I'm hoping that tonight we're going to have a wonderfully outspoken conversation about the state of Virginia, the state of the Democrats, the state of America, the state of Donald Trump, although let's try to leave any discussion about that for a while. And perhaps most immediately, the state of the governor races, because there is now the race underway in Virginia, and you recently got on the record saying that you regard this as ground zero for the Democrats. Tell us why you think the current race in Virginia is so important and what it means for the wider position of politics across America today.
Well, we just had the presidential election, and there are always two gubernatorial elections right after the presidential election, Virginia and New Jersey. New Jersey, Phil Murphy is running for governor there. He's running against Chris Christie's lieutenant governor. If you didn't know, Chris Christie's at 15%. So Phil is in very good shape to be the next governor of New Jersey. Virginia is always a bellwether state. It's a hard state in the off year. If the governor's race were held in a presidential year, you would have a Democratic governor forever. But it's not. It's deliberately held the year after. Turnout goes from 80+% to 40. And when I ran and won, I ran on a very progressive agenda, the most in Virginia history. I told women I'd be a brick wall to protect their rights. I told the NRA to go jump off a cliff. I told members of the LGBT community that I would protect their rights. This has never happened in Virginia. It's an old Southern, traditionally, as Al knows, a conservative state. But I leaned in on the issues because I wanted people to vote for me. I actually ran against the Attorney General, who actually said it should be a crime to be gay in Virginia. I could go on and give you other chapters and verses. So it was a big race for me, and we ended up winning. I got the most votes of any Democrat ever running for governor on a platform that was new to Virginia. So I do think Virginia is sort of a trendsetter. It's a former home of the capital of the Confederacy. We have a lot of issues with statues and all of that, which will probably...
Anyone here from Virginia? Okay, well, they're all sitting in the front row, so they know who to impress.
Yeah, they all came with me.
Okay, so you can... Exactly.
They're my cheering section if nobody cheers.
So
they're going to start the wave in a few minutes. So
exactly.
So it's a big race. My lieutenant governor, Ralph Northam, is running against Ed Gillespie, who was chairman of the Republican National Committee when I was chairman of the Democratic National Committee many years ago. It's an important race. Donald Trump today is 36% in Virginia. Virginians today, 66% of Virginians think the state is moving in the right direction. That same 66% think the country's heading the wrong direction. If you know polling data, it is so hard to get an anomaly like that. People are happy in Virginia. We almost have full employment today. We've leaned in on the issue. So, I think Ralph's going to win, but you can't take it for granted. The Tea Party will vote regardless, rain, snow, sleet. They are going to come out. The last thing I'll say, when I ran, Ralph ran against their lieutenant governor candidate back in 2013. He was an African-American bishop of a church of one. He said that if you practice and go to yoga, you are following Satanism. I am not making any of this up. And if you have a child who has a disability, it is because your parents were sinners. This is what he said 4 years ago running. The odds of this guy getting 10 votes, unlikely, and spent $60,000. E.W. Jackson got about 973,000 votes. That is the base in Virginia for the Republican Party in an off year. We as Democrats got to get 1 million people to come out. I got about 1,076,000 people to vote for me. But it's work to do that. But with Trump, the numbers he's at, and the state heading the right direction, and the press will treat this as a real bellwether.
Right. But the thing that's interesting is that this is not just important for Virginia. It has a lot of implication for the state of the Democrats across America today? Because, speaking as someone who runs the editorial operation of a newspaper in America, North America, I know that we are obsessed by this psychodrama soap opera that is Washington these days. And there's not been a lot of headspace, space on the printed page, simply journalists to talk about what's happening at the state level. But one of the points you've been making recently is actually there's been a lot of very radical changes occurring at the state level in terms of the political composition of America. Explain to us why this matters.
And I just finished my term. I was chairman of the National Governors Association. We just finished our meeting up in Rhode Island. My whole emphasis had been, I brought Justin Trudeau, first time we've ever had a head of state come address all the nation's governors. We brought in delegations from China, Vietnam, from Mexico, and our message is Washington is broken. Nothing happens in Washington, folks. If you want to get things done, go to the states. If you want to have economic activity, you want to do trade, go directly to the states, because this is where it's happening. And for those that are Democrats in this audience, I'm very involved in this new effort with President Obama, Eric Holder, Nancy Pelosi, and I on redistricting, because people have to understand our party has dropped the ball as it relates to redistricting. We come out and raise billions of dollars every 4 years in a presidential election, and then everybody goes away. They don't pay attention to the state races. So what the Republicans have systematically done over the last 10 years is gone state by state. North Carolina, perfect example. It was a progressive state. They came in, they took over the state.
And who is they?
Well, the Koch brothers funded it very smartly, and it actually was run by Ed Gillespie, who was running for governor, and Karl Rove. So where we are today in this country is they control 35 states. We're both chambers and the governor. Do you know how many governors, Democrats, there are today? 15. That's as of today, because Jim Justice from West Virginia, who ran as a Democrat, who took $2 million from the Democratic Governors Association, today joined Donald Trump and left the Democratic Party. That is a disgrace. So we're down to 15. Why does this matter? Because in the last 8 years, we've lost about 960 state legislative seats. We have gotten crushed at the state level. So we'll do the census in 2020, and then 2021, they redraw every line in America, every state legislature, every congressional seat. Right now, those states, they are going to draw a Republican map. The only person who can stop that is a Democratic governor. If Ralph doesn't win in Virginia, my legislature is very Republican, 66 Republicans out of 100. They will put a map up that gives them more power. He has to veto it, and then we'll go to an independent commission. Because what I'm obsessed by this topic, because what they are doing at the state level are rolling back voting rights, voter suppression laws, voter ID laws, anti-women. I just vetoed a bill, folks, in Virginia that would have defunded every Planned Parenthood clinic. I just vetoed a bill the other day that would have allowed machine guns to be sold in our gun stores. I just vetoed a bill recently that in order to get an absentee ballot, you have to fax in your driver's license. Now, what's the purpose of that? You know what the purpose is. It is to roll back voter rights and make it harder for people to vote. So we have been asleep at the switch, and they consistently have gone state by state by state, rolling back the issues. I am a very socially progressive Democrat. I'm a very pro-business, fiscally conservative Democrat, socially progressive as hell. But they are rolling these rights back in the state, and we have allowed this to happen, and we got to get in the game, and we better win 38 governors between today and 2018. 38. If we don't win a majority of these governors, folks, the things that I believe in and some of you believe in, we're in trouble.
So why have the Democrats been asleep at the switch? Because, in some ways what you're saying, the implications are that if you don't win, essentially you're facing wipeout at local level to a significant degree. I mean, how could a party sleepwalk into this state of affairs? Is this just because the Koch brothers have been smarter than anybody else, everyone else?
Well, yes, I'd say yes. They figured this out. I think our party has been too interested in the presidency and not enough at state and local candidates. I mean, look at the turnout numbers in state and local elections. But the effect has been devastating for our party. And, in fairness, Koch brothers put up $1 billion. We in our party have never had anyone that has put up that kind of money. And listen, it's business for the Koch brothers. You roll back environment. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, they're not going to argue the point. But they've had the money and the technology. Just look what they did in the last presidential election on all the data analytics they did and the fake news and all that. They have moved miles ahead. We're right on. People agree with us on the issues. But it is what it is. I can't speak to, I think in 2000, everybody thought, well, he did win the election, Al Gore. In 2010, people just didn't focus on the party. That's why the day after the presidential election, I called up Nancy Pelosi. And I said, Nancy, I don't care how much money you have. If these lines are drawn where you can't win elections, it doesn't matter. We got to get closer to 50-50. Even when I was chairman of the Democratic Party, I'm for nonpartisan, independent commissions to draw these lines. Get them close to 50-50 because competition is good. Congress, 95% of Congress, they win re-election. In my state, 140 House, Senate, our last elections, 85 didn't even have a general election opponent. How is that good for democracy? There's no competition. Competition makes you strong.
So do you think that the leadership of the Democrats are focusing enough on this yet? Because at the moment when I talk to people, there's still this all-consuming discussion, if they're not mourning what happened last year, this all-consuming discussion about, who is going to be the next leader? Can they find a leader? What will be the platform? What will be the agenda? How do you sell trade policy to the voters? And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Mm-hmm. I'm not hearing a lot of discussion about the local issue.
Yeah, I get sick when everyone, I just get so tired. Forget all that.
Well, I want to ask you that as well, who you think should be the next leader, but you're not going to get off that easily.
No, but I'm just saying, we have got to get in the trenches and start winning at the local level. Because I'm telling you, they're ripping our rights away at the local level. I don't care about 2020. I tell people this all the time. I got an election in 17, and I got 36 governors up in 18. If we as Democrats don't start playing in these, it doesn't matter. Because what happens on the presidential? Look what happened in Wisconsin. Hundreds of thousands of people who went and voted. Think about this, in 16, were denied even though they were allowed to vote in 12 because of new voter ID laws. So it does affect the presidency because they get in, and this is a concerted effort, and they have this group called ALEC, and they're very organized. It is what it is, but are we focused? We are. I'm telling you, we're killing ourselves now to put this called NDRC. And, we're doing the lawsuits. We got a lot of DGA folks. They do the elections there. Our focus is let's go in and sue. We sued in Virginia 2 years ago, and just by that lawsuit, we were able to get a new Democratic member of Congress. We went from 8-3 now to 7-4. We've sued also on our House of Delegates. It is so gerrymandered, 66 out of 100, and yet Democrats win all the statewide offices. And the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court just ruled in our favor 7-1. So we need to do this in other states. All I'm asking are fair lines. Forget these snakes and, there is one district in Virginia, it is only contiguous, listen to me, when the James River is at low tide. It's unbelievable.
Right.
Well, you wonder why people are mad at politics.
Let's talk about some policy issues and how you actually forge a Democrat agenda that's actually sellable. Now, one of the things that you've been unusual in Virginia is traveling a lot and making it very clear that you want to be embracing open trade, if not free trade, then trade deals with the rest of the world. I think I'm right in thinking you're the most traveled governor, is that right? Yes.
30 trade missions.
30 trade missions, right.
Well, people ask me, why do you travel so much? 90% of the world's customers live outside America. I just announced last week, you know what our ag and forestry in Virginia, last year, $91 billion. Shattered every record. We're up 35% in a year. Why? Because we're traveling, we're selling our goods, we're bringing businesses in. And listen, I supported, I differed from many people in our party on TPP. I supported President Obama. I spent a lot of time with the president, Ambassador Michael Froman. You give me a trade deal where worker rights are protected, environmental rights are protected. I relied on President Obama when he looked me in the eye. He said, this is a great deal for our workers and for the environment. I trusted the president. I can compete against anybody around the globe. You give me a fair deal. But let me just tell you about TPP. 66% of Virginia exports, guess what? They went to those 11 countries. Now it's gone. China has already done a deal, I think, with 4. And by the end of the year, all 11 countries will have a direct deal with China. Guess who is out of the game? The United States of America. My job as governor is to create jobs. I will go anywhere to do it. I can compete against anybody. But, you know, if I'm going to have an unfair trade deal now with these 11 countries, you're going to see my exports drop dramatically.
So how do you sell that open trade message to voters, though? Because what you're seeing is rising protectionism, not just from the Republicans, but the Democrats as well. How on earth do you create a mantra that's actually going to win anyone votes on that basis?
Well, in fairness, as governor, my job's not to win votes. My job's to create jobs. And we're very happy. Unemployment has dropped dramatically from 5.4 to 3.7. A couple 100,000 new jobs. We have shattered every economic record in Virginia. Why? Because we're trade. So, as I say, Virginians are very happy with what's going on. It's not about votes. What do people want from elected officials? They want a quality job. They want their kids to have a job. They want a great education system. They want health care, and they want to go see their kids play a ball game, and it shouldn't take 2 hours on a congested road. They don't ask much. It's not about me, and we forget the point. It's about you. It's the people. And sometimes we forget all of this, and many of the folks who have made these arguments on trade, I don't mean this disrespectfully, have never created a job in their lives. Governors do. We're different. No offense to Congress, and I love them. I think they're terrific.
Well,
they don't create jobs. They don't. They don't balance budgets. Every governor has to balance a budget. I had a tough budget last year. I had to make some really tough choices. I protected education funding. It's not pleasant. Here is Congress who gets to print money. They do. And they still can't balance them. We're still under a continuing resolution. So at the end of the day, people want results from us. They're tired of the political posturing. I have a very Republican legislature in the House of Delegates, and yet they worked with me on economic development. I put $1 billion into K-12 education last year, the biggest we've ever done. They worked with me. We reformed transportation. We disagree violently on social issues. I have vetoed 120 bills, the most of any governor in Virginia history, and I'm very proud of that because I stopped all the anti-women, anti-gay, all these horrible things. And remember, there's 66 Republicans in my House of Delegates. If they get 67, they override my veto. In 4 years, folks, they never overrode me once. I'm 120-0, the only governor, because I was fighting for them.
Right. So,
come on, you guys are supposed to stand up here. I mean, the only reason I invited you was to make some noise. I mean, you got the folks
we've got
in
a very
back.
Enthusiastic front row here.
I got folks in Minnesota clapping. What's the matter with you?
Okay. Well, when it comes to the questions, I'm going to start at the back. So there we go. But let's turn to the president, Donald Trump. Have you met him? Have you dealt with him much?
President Trump?
Yes.
Yeah. I've known him probably for 20 years.
Can you work with him on things like infrastructure?
Great question. You know, when he got elected, I was chairman of the governors. I sent him a letter, want to work with him on tax reform, infrastructure, and health care. Went to the White House, took all the governors. We had dinner with him. I sat with him, talked with him for an hour. Want to work with you on all these things. I just sat next to him when we commissioned the United States USS Gerald Ford the other day. Said the same things. There's been zero outreach. They don't want to work with us. It's unfortunate. I would think everybody wants everybody to work together. You know, you think in our history with Tip O'Neill, you know, working with Ronald Reagan. They fought, but they got things done together. Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, Danny Rostenkowski and George Bush. People want you to come together. And I have had no outreach from this administration, nor have any of the governors. Healthcare, I'm very proud of the governors. We stood as a brick wall to protect that, to make sure that thing did not go through. And, you know, 20, 30 million people would have lost health care. But I told the president when I had dinner with him face to face, and I said, Mr. President, you ran on jobs. I was sitting as close, we're about 4 inches apart. I said, all you've done is hurt my economy. I said, you put a travel ban on, and I'm very proud. I was the first guy, governor, I went right up to Dulles Airport. That first day, I'd gotten tipped off at 10 o'clock that there was a family from Virginia at Dulles Airport being detained for 5 hours, 2 children with passports without access to a legal counsel. I flew right up there, pulled the cameras together, and said, I'm not leaving until they have access to legal counsel. This is outrageous. I lost 2 economic development projects. I told the president, your immigration policy is horrendous. You're hurting people. I went to see Secretary Kelly, had a 45-minute one-on-one meeting. You people, you're hurting our country. We have 11 million folks who are in this country. And I said, what's your policy? Well, unless they commit a serious criminal offense, they get to stay here. Mr. President, that's your policy? Yes. Mr. Secretary, that's your policy? Yes. And yet, I just had a woman who got stopped for a broken taillight, who didn't have a driver's license. They just ripped her away from her family. 2 young children, she's gone. So they say one thing and they do another. And it hurts. I want to work with them on tax reform. I want to work with them on infrastructure, but, you know, got to do it together.
I recently interviewed Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, who made the point that if the president wants to implement any of his infrastructure pledges, he's going to have to work with the mayors and the governors. Would you agree? And do you see any sign that people are learning the lessons? Because you've been pushing forward quite a lot of PPP projects and public-private partnerships in Virginia, haven't you? We're
the leader in the country. We have done more public-private partnerships than any state in America. I now have $10 billion worth of projects, building massive new roads, multimodal, new Amtrak rail service. But let me tell you about, and this is the Trump administration mentality, oh, we'll do public-private partnerships. That's where the state, we bring private partners, we do it together. It works. Those in Virginia, I just announced the 66. I'm building 10 new lanes. It was supposed to cost the taxpayers $1 billion. It's not costing us a penny, and I'm getting a check for $500 million next week when we close. Not a penny of taxpayer money. That's a good public-private partnership. But in America, there's only 20 states that even have the legislation. Only 5 states have ever done a public-private partnership. But if you're in a state like Nevada, you don't have you got to have tolling revenue. You got to have an income source. So that's not the answer to infrastructure. I've long advocated, controversial to some people, you ought to raise the gas tax. I view the gas tax as a user fee. We hadn't raised it in 30 years. Well, are you going to know another penny on your gas? Of course not. Our roads and bridges are crumbling in this country. We need more multimodal. So 66 was the most congested road in the United States of America. I've now come up with a solution. That's what we need to do. I did it without the federal government, but I'd love them to help me.
Which leads me on to another key point, which is, to what degree do you think the states can actually work around the federal government at the moment on issues like climate change, where we've already seen people like Mayor Bloomberg essentially try to create a coalition together with a wide range of actors, Jerry Brown, Governor Hickenlooper, and others. You know, to what degree are we going to see that happening in climate change, in things like opioid legislation, another area where there's been a flurry of lawsuits recently from the states, essentially front-running anything coming out of the federal structures, to even areas like infrastructure? I mean, is it actually the states the area we should be looking at right now rather than Washington for this type of action?
Yeah. And I can tell you, climate change, I'm very proud. I was the first governor in the post-era. I did an executive order. I said, we're going to do a reduction. We're going to meet the Reggie states. I did it through an executive order. I did it before he came out of Paris, but I had an idea he was going to pull out. So I did it myself. I'm very proud of it. We got out early, and we are now doing it ourselves. Why is this important to Virginia? The sea level rise is real. The second most vulnerable region in America, Louisiana is 1, New Orleans is number 1, Hampton Roads, Virginia is number 2. We have the largest naval base in the world in Hampton Roads, Virginia. Norfolk Naval Base, largest in the world. I better show the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Navy that I am serious about this. You can go to Norfolk, Virginia on a day where it's rained for 2 hours, half the roads are closed. I've got a report on my desk right now that shows that by 2050, the moderate range, not the extreme, the moderate range shows that we will have 222 days a year of flooding. I lose $91 billion of real estate and infrastructure in my Hampton Roads region. This is not, and for 132 countries were in this agreement. I mean, think of this. Iran and North Korea were with us, and he pulls out. It's embarrassing for our country. I just got back from a trade mission to Europe, 7 nations. First question everybody asks me, what are you people doing? So instead of doing economic development, and I said, don't say we, say him. You know, I went to Mexico, folks, as soon as he did all of his ridiculousness on the wall. And you saw the story today. Here he's telling the president of Mexico, oh, don't be so negative on the wall. I'll get it paid for somewhere else. You're hurting me politically.
But to what degree can you actually offset that? Because it's one thing for the states to say, yes, we're going to club together and show the rest of the world that we still care about the climate. Do you think you can actually offset what the president
undo
the damage?
I did it myself through an executive order. All the governors are getting together in agreement. We're going to do it ourselves. Forget the federal government. They're doing nothing. They pass nothing.
Right.
Ask me how I feel about Congress. but I'll tell you, as a governor, it's frustrating because everything they do or don't do lands on our desks. We're the ones who build the roads. They don't. We're the ones who run our education systems. They don't. We run Medicaid. They don't. And that's why we're all on the Medicare-Medicaid debate. We run these programs in our states. We know what works and doesn't work. Talk to the governors. So, of course, the answer to the question is you bet.
So, two other questions, and I'm going to open it up to the audience. Firstly, skills shortages and training. I was very intrigued to see recently you were talking about this in Virginia and saying that, obviously one great success has been that you've cut the unemployment rate quite sharply, but you recently said you have thousands of jobs in Virginia which are in computing, in cybersecurity,
yep.
which are paying a starting salary of $80,000. $88,000, which are currently unfilled.
Correct.
Why? And what can you do about it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think every governor deals with this issue. And this is where I'm trying to get the Democrats to talk about, just don't talk about jobs, or don't tell me you're going to do free college. That's not the issue. The issue is your education system in making sure people have the apprenticeships or the industry credentials, the skill training to match all the jobs that exist, putting that connective tissue together. Don't tell me about free college. No offense to anybody. That's still not going to get me a skilled workforce. Tell me what you're doing in education. So last year I put $1 billion up. We're redesigning. Our high schools in America don't work anymore, folks. They don't. They were built for the Industrial Revolution. Big buildings with classrooms, with seats. You got credit for seat time. That does not do you any good in a 21st century economy. So now in Virginia, 36,000 cyber jobs, #1 state in America. I'm very proud of that. We've created so many cyber jobs, we got to fill them. Beginning this fall in Virginia, starting in kindergarten, cybersecurity is going to be taught, the only school in America, K through 12. So computer science, computational reasoning and thinking are now added as core courses beginning in kindergarten in Virginia. We're the first state to do this. I also did an executive directive that we put up hundreds of millions of dollars. There's about 114 industry credentials, cyber, truck drivers, welders. If you're willing, bless you, if you're willing to go get one of those industry credentials, listen to this, very important. We, the state, will pay 2/3 of the cost. Now, you pay 1/3, because I think everybody's got to have a little something in it. We'll pay 2/3 of it. Our industry credentials in the first year we did this program quadrupled by 4. So we are putting that together, the connective tissue of what skills are needed for the jobs exist. I have more veterans per capita in any state in America. I have more female veterans. I have more veterans under the age of 25. If you're a veteran and you come out, I will pay for you to go get a cybersecurity degree. If you were a medic and corpsman in the military, now in most states you come out, you got to get a 2-year license. I have waived that in Virginia. You got more experience over in the battlefield, so I move you right in to I need people in the medical profession. I move you right in, first state in America to do it. So it's what we call the workforce development, and we've got to drill down. We have all these great paying jobs, build that skill set. I graduate 100,000 students a year out of our Virginia. 4-year colleges, let me be very clear with you. The good colleges are all going to survive, but I'm telling you, over the next 10 or 20 years, 4-year colleges are going to be a thing of the past. 60% of the jobs in Virginia over the next 10 years will require a 2-year degree. That's why your community colleges teaching that skill set. I can hire a welder tomorrow to go work at Newport News Shipyard, where every aircraft carrier in our U.S. Navy is built, I remind you. 9 nuclear subs being built right now. Where? Virginia. I need welders. I will pay for you to go get the welding degree, and you'll start tomorrow at $68,000.
Okay,
Those are good paying jobs. But you know what my point is? Everybody says, oh, we'll pay for this. Forget all that. Putting that together, the skills, teaching the skill set. I hired 1,800 new cyber teachers in Virginia in K through 12. A degree is not a degree. It matters what the degree is. No offense to anyone who took anthropology. I think that's great. But, you know.
Well, I'm going to defend anthropology.
I don't mean it negative, but you ought to do that on your own nickel. I need workers and a governor to have open jobs and not filling them. Oh.
Well, I guess the moral is, if any of you got kids who are back living at home and without a job, pack them off to Virginia with a laptop.
Right. Think of that. No, not only that, let me tell you this.
Yeah.
Folks, listen to me carefully. 310 wineries, 215 craft breweries. You come to Virginia, you see our historic sites, Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello, Jamestown, where it all started, 1607. Where did they come? They didn't go to Massachusetts or Pennsylvania or New York. They came to Virginia. That dinky rock up in Massachusetts, that was 1620, 1607. 8 varieties of oysters. Eat our oysters, drink our wine. Our slogan, Virginia's for lovers. You figure out the rest. I can't do everything here.
Okay, well, I'm going to make you raise your sights beyond Virginia right now, just for a second, before I turn to the audience and say, obviously, the other big question hanging over the Democrats right now is who will be the next presidential candidate? Do you have anyone who you're particularly drawn towards or you want to back?
No, I'm very serious.
Are you considering jumping into the fray yourself?
I am focused on finishing up hard, running through the tape as Virginia governor.
Because you're free after January, aren't you?
Well, but I'm doing this redistricting. I am so passionate that we have got to, between now and 2018, I'm just telling you, it doesn't matter who the president is if systematically all the things that we believe in on protecting rights, civil rights, human rights, is wiped out at the state level. So I tell everybody, every candidate, potential candidate, don't even talk to me about 2020. Tell me how you're going to help 2018.
But I'm going to talk to you about 2020. Would you like to run?
I would like to be, I want to finish up strong as governor. That's all I'm saying. I'm finishing up strong as governor. But here's what I'd say. I don't care who it is. But the Democratic, you need a Democrat, first of all, who's going to fight. And you need someone who's going to focus on the voters and the things I talked about. It's jobs, but it's more important than that. This is about you. This is about you, the voter, and providing that opportunity for your children to have a high-quality job. That is really, as I mentioned those 4 things earlier, that's what people really care about. Not all this stuff that gets thrown up and tell me what you're doing for me. They elected me to be governor to get things done in Virginia.
Well, I think that's called a half duck.
Okay.
But anyway, on that note, I'm going to turn to you, the audience, and ask who would like to ask a question. It would be courteous but not compulsory to identify yourself. Please raise your hands if you'd like to ask a question. We have some roving microphones around. Please keep them short. We don't want long statements, even though I know that politics tends to arouse high passions these days. And let's start at the back with the gentleman in the red coat over there, who I'm guessing probably is not from Virginia, but...
The University of Virginia, what's your opinion of it?
What's what?
Someone's asking about your opinion of the University of Virginia. Did you attend the University of Virginia?
Yes, I graduated.
Greatest school in America. Founded by Thomas Jefferson himself. So folks, think about this when you go home to bed tonight. When you put that head on that pillow. Our first governor, who's Virginia's first governor? Patrick Henry, started the American Revolution. Give me liberty, give me death. Our second governor, Thomas Jefferson. And now, Terry McAuliffe. You gotta be kidding me. Isn't this not a great country? And I was born in New York, who knew?
Okay, we have a question here from...
Thank you, Governor. I'm from Maryland, so I'm not quite as enthusiastic about Virginia.
Let's talk about the Redskins.
Okay. You enjoy paying taxes, man. I'm fine with that.
I have 2 questions.
Yes, sir.
First, Virginia has a concealed carry law. Congress right now, it's sort of frightening, is considering a bill supported by the NRA, which would say that you'd have a federal statute which would permit, if you have a concealed carry statute in your state, you can then carry every place in the United States. I'm sort of curious about whether you can change your state statute and how you view this national proposal which the NRA has come up with. Second of all,
let's keep to one. We have a lot of hands waving around, so
okay.
Yeah, let's keep.
No, it's a very good question, and I remind you that we are the home of the National Rifle Association. When I ran for governor, I got an F, proudly. First governor, Democrat to ever run to have an F from the NRA. And listen, I'll be honest with you, I'm a hunter. I own 3 guns. I take my boys hunting. But I'm for common sense gun restrictions. First of all, everybody ought to have a background check. I did it as governor. It takes 5 minutes. You take your wallet out, you hand the license. It literally takes 5 minutes. I find it so offensive that we've got make people go through all different types of backgrounds, but we don't do it to give someone a weapon. So in Virginia, last year, we passed the first gun restriction law, and there's the issue of those that have the concealed permit. They have to go through a permitting process. We've never had an instance in Virginia history of anyone being hurt with a concealed permit in Virginia. What we have had issues, and that's the law I passed last year, and Republicans worked with me, is on domestic violence. In Virginia now, the law is, it's the strongest in America. If you get a protective order against you in Virginia today, you have 24 hours to hand your gun in. If you don't, it is a Class 6 felony, and you'll go to prison for a year, and you will lose your gun rights forever. It is It is the strictest that we have in America. And you know what? We have had, since I signed that legislation, we have had 11,000 protective orders that have been handed out. I can't tell you today how many lives have been saved, but I can tell you this, you talk to any gun advocate or even the NRA, the most vulnerable people is someone at home during a domestic situation who owns a gun. But the concealed thing, we have not had one instance of that occurring in Virginia. But I was very happy that I was able to get this particular piece of legislation passed. But, you know, the biggest issue for us is background checks. I mean, we're the site of the worst Virginia Tech, you know, the worst massacre ever on a college campus. You know, we've strengthened our laws. That gentleman had a mental illness, and it should have been diagnosed, and it should have been reported. It wasn't. But if we get through background checks, and part of the legislation we just got passed, you're not going to believe it. Our biggest problem are gun show loophole, the gun show. We have thousands. And so and I've gone to them. You go to a gun show, I'm not lying. There are hundreds and hundreds of people set up with cardboard tables selling anything. And there are signs that say, we don't do background checks. So let me ask you, who do you think are going to the gun shows, and who do you think are going to the tables that say, we don't do background checks? That should be stopped. Because if you're a law-abiding citizen, you're going to hand your license in and do a background check. But at least I got in the legislation last year. I now have a state, we didn't even have people at the gun shows that could do background checks. I now have put in my budget that there is a state police officer at every single gun show. It has to be volunteer. I couldn't get mandatory passed in Virginia, but at least they're there, and it's a step. Because if somebody buys a gun and does some offense, and that gun dealer had the ability to get a background check done and didn't do it, this could be the first step for liability. So we're making progress, but it's a hard, we should have background checks. Plain and simple.
Right. Well, I'm sorry to cut you off for your question because I can see a lot of hands waving. I'm going to go across there and then along here. So I'm moving from sort of left to right. So, and I can also see a gentleman at the back as well.
But I do love Maryland.
Then I'll go over to the right-hand side.
I'm from California, actually, a long way away. Just curious, I was delighted with so much of what you said. One thing that wasn't mentioned, you mentioned the effort to destroy the voting process here. We've heard in the last couple of weeks here, in terms of security people who say, we know the Russians hacked, But the states, according to some of the federal folks who were here on cybersecurity, some of them, probably not your state, really don't want to cooperate. You know, we want to keep it in the state. We don't want to listen to some good advice about how to stop the hacking in 2018. Would you comment, please?
Yeah. So you have this new commission, which has no authority from Congress, has no funding. This Kovacs guy, who is the poster child for voter suppression, that is his history. I'm very proud. I was the first governor that said, no way am I ever giving my data over to this commission, because I do believe that their effort is they want to use it for gerrymandering purposes and voter suppression. I have always said, if you have show me one instance in Virginia, I will be the first guy. I got to tell you, to me, nothing is more sacred than voting. I was sick to my stomach last year when 92 million Americans didn't vote. We have people who have fought and died for the right to vote in this country. We've got people like my son, who is a Marine right now in a very conflict region, fighting for our basic freedoms and liberties, and you can't vote, shame on you. So I take this very seriously, and I don't want to see anything that would infringe upon the integrity of our voting system. And this is why I'm madder than hell at Donald Trump, and I have told him to his face, by you continually raising these issues, you are creating doubt about the greatest democracy in the world. Nations who look to America for the greatest voting, the greatest democracy, and he cannot get over the fact that Hillary Clinton, I'm going to say it right here, got 3 million more votes than he did. I'm sorry, Mr. President, get over it. Stop this stuff, because you're hurting our country. And that's why, but if there's a legitimate issue on voting, and there was a report that, 32 or 36 states were hacked, I want to know it. They haven't told me yet. If it's Virginia, I want to know it, and I'll stop it. And I can speak for every governor, but I'm not turning over my data to some partisan voter suppression guy who's going to use, this is your personal data. My job is to protect Virginia citizens, their life, liberty, and their information, so I'm not going to hand it over. You did mention on the voting, thank you. I do want to mention one thing if I could, because you mentioned the restoration. Probably my proudest moment as governor, put all the economics aside, is I now have the record of having restored more felon rights than any governor in the history of the United States of America. This was a very ugly deal in Virginia. We were the capital of the Confederacy. We have a lot of issues in Virginia. And in Virginia, we have people who have paid their debt to society. They're done. They're back in society, folks. They're out. They're paying taxes. They're going to church. They're going to schools. You don't want them to vote? I was so sick of people coming up to me saying, you know, Governor, election day, I'd go to a voting polling place and hope someone dropped their iVoting sticker so I could put it on and go to my house and tell my children I voted, because I'm embarrassed to tell them I couldn't vote. This happens, folks, all the time. And Virginia had one of the worst histories. In 1902, on our capital, also designed by Thomas Jefferson, 1785, second oldest capital. Annapolis is number one. I'll give you that, sir. But standing in 1902, a senator by the name of Glass stood on our capital with a disenfranchisement of felons, a poll tax, and a literacy test for our Constitution. His quote was, "We are doing this to eliminate the darky from being a political force in Virginia." That's his quote. I got to stand there 114 years later, new sheriff in town, and I restored the rights of 206,000 individuals who had paid their debt to society, were back out. And what happened? The Republicans sued me, took me to the Supreme Court, and said I didn't have the authority. Well, I'll be honest with you, folks. I went to Georgetown Law School. I ran 3 companies while I was there, and I went full-time day. Let me put it this way. You would never hire me to be your lawyer, okay? I didn't spend a lot of time there, but I got the degree and I passed the bar and whatever. But you're not going to hire me, I get it. Even with my limited background in legal knowledge, I knew the sentence, the governor has the authority to restore his rights, was pretty clear. They said, we're not going to let this governor do it because guess what? No governor has ever done it in Virginia history. Well, that's not a constitutional theory, but Supreme Court, 2 states appointed by the legislature. The plaintiff was the speaker and the Senate leader, so the plaintiffs were the people who appointed him. Surprise, surprise. They said he has to sign every order individually. Well, I said, fine. Stack them up and bring the pens out. I went out to our Civil Rights Memorial in front of our Capitol and said, I'm signing them all individually. Whoa. They sued me again, took me to Supreme Court. I am the first Virginia governor to be sued for contempt of court. Guess what? I won that one, and we've signed them all now, and they're full citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Now we have a question over there, the gentleman in the red shirt, and then...
Jay Rue is my name. I work for One Korea Foundation, unification of Korea. But today's question has to do with power base of President Trump. Their support for the president is very solid, good or bad. I mean, unless he shoots somebody on 7th Avenue, they will stay with him, right? So what is the answer of the Democratic Party, or as a potential presidential candidate later on, about this group? Will this group remain as a political force beyond the tenure of President Trump? And if it does, how are you going to plan to fight it or take them back?
So, can you flip the Trump voters?
Trump the what?
Can
Voters?
you flip the Trump voters?
Good question.
And how?
Hey, listen, I'm not going to relive 16. We can sit here and talk about Russians and Jim Comey. I mean, we can do all that. It's not going to serve any purpose today. I think he probably has a solid core of 30 to 35%. No matter what happens, that core is probably going to be with him. But that leaves 65% of Americans who have the ability, if they hear a message from the Democrats. I mean, I've been friends with the Clintons for 40 years. We've been best friends for a long time. She worked her heart out. It just, a lot of circumstances came in. We'd had it for 8 years. People wanted change. And, I think we lost independence 4-1 the day after Comey did what he did. It is what it is, and that's politics that we live in. This is a rough and tumble business. But the answer to your question is yes, we can, because all of these issues I just talked to you about should appeal to the rural parts of our country who want health care, who want their children to have a quality education. And I'm very proud. One thing I haven't mentioned, in all my most rural communities, unemployment has dropped in half. You go to Waz, Buchanan, Suffolk, Petersburg, unemployment's dropped in half. We've created economic opportunity for them. But we got to tell them, how we do it. So I do think the answer to your question is yes, we have the right messaging. I think Trump got out there and said a lot of things. He said a lot of things that were not true. I mean, the wall is never going to be built, okay? It's not going to happen. Never was going to happen. I just went to Mexico. I met with the president and the cabinet and every governor. I said to everyone on Mexican TV, this wall will never be built. You come to, forget Washington, you come to Virginia. We build bridges of economic opportunity. We don't build walls. The place exploded.
Right.
Our message works. We've got the messages, Democrats, but you got to talk about it.
Right.
Get out there.
I know something that's very dear to your heart.
I didn't mean you. I mean,
I know something very dear to your heart is engaging millennials. And we have what looks like someone who could be a millennial, a bit of a minority in the audience.
Right.
So I'd like to give him a chance to ask a question, please.
Well, I guess that's...
Are you a millennial?
No, I'm actually Generation Z, so...
Generation Z,
the
so you're a
generation younger
sub-millennial.
than millennials.
Okay, even better.
No, but I'm Caleb Hurst Sussman, and I live in New York City, where we have, I think, 28 school buildings that were built in this Great Depression off of the same exact plan from the guy who just designed Rikers Island Prison. So we have these buildings that are built essentially like prisons, gigantic classrooms, and the state of our public education system in New York City, especially right now, is crumbling. And our mayor right now, Bill de Blasio, really doesn't seem to want to fix it. And that seems to be a theme going throughout the country, where a lot of mayors and our president don't seem to want to touch education reform. And Virginia, as you mentioned, is one of the states that has really been spearheading getting into technology, and it reflects that as University of Virginia at Charlottesville is one of the best in the country, public or private. So how would you say mayors or governors or even the federal government should go about reforming the public education system?
Yeah, it's a good question. And when you mention public education, what immediately springs in my mind are giving you an education with a skill set to match all of these jobs. We have millions of jobs open in America today. But as I mentioned earlier, our education system, it is what it is not delivering for you. And that's our fault. We in elective office, and in fairness, I mean, I hate to use this, but we are Virginia because of the $1 billion, and I got that in bipartisan. Working with my Republican, they understood. I have convinced all my legislators that you can create, think of how this works. Now, I've got the record of the most jobs created, the most economic investment. How have I done that? Out there traveling, but I've convinced everybody that I will have a workforce. Before a company is going to move to America and invest $100 million in a new plant, they want to know they're going to have a workforce for 10, 20, 30 years. You've got to show them investment in education. Once you get them to come in, I get to invest more in education. I then get to build a better workforce. This is not rocket science, and I try to tell elected officials this all the time. They get in the weeds on things that really don't make a difference. We've had to make some changes in Virginia. We had things called standards of learning. You have regents, right? You still, New York, have regents? Yeah. I took those years ago. I'm not sure I passed them, but whatever, I took them. We had way too many tests in Virginia. We as a society are over-testing. You know, I want to know, I really, don't take this the wrong way, I really don't care how you did on a test, but I want to know if you've got creative thought process going on, there's a cognitive reasoning process. I've started 30 different companies. I don't care, if you worked for me, I really don't care what you got on a test. I want to know if I have a problem, that you're going to be able to solve it for me. And that's street smart, common sense, it's all of that. And we've got to bring more of that into the school system. So now, in our high schools in Virginia, beginning this fall, internships, externships, on-the-job training, credit for apprenticeships, industry credentialing, all happening in high schools. I've gotten rid of 5 SOLs. We had just too many tests. Teachers were teaching to test. Kids were learning how to memorize. It doesn't do anybody any good. So,
Well,
but you got to invest money. And the other thing, you got to pay your teachers. And too many people shortchange teachers. Thank you. Teachers hadn't had a pay raise in like 6 years in Virginia. I was losing teachers. So I've done 2 pay raises in my 3.5 years as governor. You got to get quality teachers. As I say, I just went out 1,800 new cyber teachers. You know, we've done that. Pay your teachers. And I got rural poverty areas. I need to pay teachers more. You can't leave these schools in poverty-stricken areas because it's a self-perpetuating cycle. Put the best teachers there because these kids then won't get in trouble. I have a huge new initiative in Virginia called Classrooms, Not Courtrooms. Too many African-American children were being suspended and expelled, sent home. You think that's helpful? You will pay for it at the end of the day. Keep them in school, get them that skill set, get them back into the workforce. Final thing I tell you, move out of New York, come to Virginia.
and preferably with
Is
a
that
laptop.
your mother? I'm trying to help your son here. I mean, I see a cyber warrior in his future.
Well, sadly, very sadly, it's actually great to end on a note that everyone can agree on and a very practical, common sense theme that is so central to the future of America. From my point of view, I'd like to say, firstly, thank you for your service. Thank you for your enthusiasm in selling Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you.
And last but not least, thank you for being so wonderfully outspoken and frank talking, because it makes you a lot more fun to interview. Watch this space and watch this man. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's hear it for our interviewer. Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thank you.